Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Semaj MindSpa. We have a special edition. We celebrate two persons, Garvey 139, Semaj 75, two men born August 17. A Semaj MindSpa special tribute. Now, why? Greetings, Jamaica. Greetings to the world. We start with our folks in Trelawney, along the north coast of Jamaica to the west end. And then we reach out to the rest of the world. Wherever in the world you're listening for, welcome to a very special edition of the Semaj MindSpa, the August 17 special edition. Welcome to all of those on Fit FM, ja.com, Fit FM. 75 cycles around the sun, huh? 3/4 of a century. That's me. Now, I could spend this hour talking about myself. Huh? At 75, perhaps, I've earned a little indulgence. However, there's another, even more important birthday today, a rather more consequential one. 139 years ago, on August 17, 1887, a Jamaican boy was born in St. Anne's Bay. His name was Marcus Mosiah Garvey. This day, Marcus Garvey would have been 139 years. This day, Leahcim Semaj is 75. Two Jamaican men born August 17. Sometimes we call things coincidence, huh? Sometimes some things are bigger than coincidence. And we have to learn to understand and appreciate love, the significance involved. Separated by 64 years. Now, I make no comparisons between the historical significance of Marcus Garvey and myself. That would be foolish. Garvey became one of the most consequential Jamaicans ever born. His ideas traveled across oceans and generations. His influence reached Africa, Europe, the Caribbean, the Americas. My journey has been much smaller. Psychology, education, management, leadership, personal development. Trying in my own way to help people understand themselves and the societies they create. My birthday invites reflection also. However, sharing August 17th with Marcus Garvey has always given me something larger than myself to think about. Because Garvey's life raised a question that becomes increasingly important as we grow older. The question, what are you doing with the years you have been given? What are you doing? Not how long you have lived. What have you done with that living? Now, that is our MindSpa question today. Garvey at 139, Semaj at 75, two men born August 17. And perhaps somewhere between those two numbers is a conversation about Jamaica, purpose, identity, courage, legacy, and what it means to spend your life trying to make a difference. What does it mean? Now, before the icon, there was a boy. When we speak about Marcus Garvey today, we speak about the monument, the national hero, Pan-Africanist, Black nationalist, publisher, organizer, founder of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. But monuments can be dangerous. Once we turn somebody into a monument, we sometimes stop seeing the human being. Garvey was born in St. Anne's Bay on August 17, 1887. But he did not arrive with a sign saying, "Future National Hero." He was a child in Jamaica. He had to become Marcus Garvey. And that interests me as a psychologist. How does a person become capable of seeing possibilities that the people around him cannot yet see? How does someone develop the psychological audacity to say, the circumstances into which I was born will not determine the boundaries of my imagination? How? Garvey lived in a colonial world. Race was hierarchy. Empire was presented as natural, the British Empire. Black people were expected to understand where they belong. Know your place, boy. And Garvey's great psychological rebellion may have begun with a remarkable simple proposition. No. No, I will not accept your definition of me. No, I will not accept inferiority as my inheritance. No, I will not believe that greatness belongs naturally to somebody else. Before Garveyism became political, it was first psychological. And I think we sometimes miss that. You cannot liberate a people who have psychologically accepted their own inferiority. You can change laws, you can change government, you can change flags, but if the person looking into the mirror still believes that somebody else is naturally superior, the liberation is incomplete. In fact, I would say the liberation is impossible. Many of our people are still at that state. Garvey understood something profound about the human mind. People behave partly according to the stories they believe about themselves. Change the story, and you begin changing the possibilities. That is psychology. And perhaps that's where Garvey and I first meet across those 64 years separating our births. His instrument was mass organization. Mine has largely been psychological. But the question is similar. You know, when I started my journey as a psychologist, then as an academician, university lecturer, speaker, you know, I recognize the limitations of how many people I could reach and the eagerness to. The first thing I did, I started a band, Not Guilty, myself with Miguel Lorne, because you wanted to, if you produce music and you can get a broader spread. But then I recognized the effort that goes into making just one song. My next step was to form a sound system. Judgment. Judgment was founded in 1988, the same year that Mutabaruka founded Black Music. We were the first two sound systems in Jamaica that only played CDs. And interestingly, the two first sound systems totally committed to Black liberation and the Black conscious music. because I recognize that if I have a sound system and I play in a dance to hundreds to thousands of people, the message can spread faster. But then my next step was radio. To get on the radio, my first show was a night doctor where I told the station I would use music and talk to liberate people. And we had a hit radio station from 1 in the morning to 5 in the morning. So mind was psychological, but the same drive for mass organization. Well, mine was not so much mass organization, but mass information, getting the word to large numbers of people. Between us, our questions were similar. What do people believe about themselves? And what does that belief permit them to do and to become? Think about that. How do we change, first of all, what you believe about yourself? Because that's the limiting factor in what you can become, what you can do. Right? So let's begin by looking at the psychology of Garvey. There's something about Garvey that fascinates me beyond the politics. Garvey understood symbolisms, uniforms, titles, flags, parades, ships, newspapers, organizations, institutions. Some critics saw spectacle. Perhaps sometime it was, but psychologically, something deeper was happening. A people who had repeatedly been shown images of black subordination were being showed black authority. That matters. Black pageantry. Representation does not solve everything. We sometimes exaggerate what representation alone can accomplish. But human beings need pictures of possibilities. A child needs to see somebody who looks like him occupying spaces he has been told were unavailable to him. A community needs evidence that its people can organize, own, build, and lead. Garvey was manufacturing psychological possibilities. That may be one of his greatest contributions. And more than a century later, I have to ask, have we finished that work? Have we? Jamaica became politically independent in 1962. But are we psychologically independent? Are we any closer? The question is more uncomfortable. Whose approval do we still seek? Whose standards still define beauty? Whose institutions automatically receive greater credibility? Look at the argument we're still having about using the British, their court, as our final court of appeal. And there are large numbers of people in Jamaica who literally believe that we cannot provide justice for our people. Whose accent signals intelligence? Whose passport signals success? Why does leaving Jamaica sometimes still function as evidence that you have made it? Why can somebody become more valuable to us simply because they come from abroad? I have struggled with that as a consultant. In Jamaica, foreign consultants are valued more, are paid more, even though we local consultants have the same education, the same training, the same set of skills, but our people value us less. Political independence can happen at midnight. Psychological independence oftentimes takes generations. Garvey understood that. And I suspect we are still wrestling with that reality. Now, 64 years later, another August 17 child was born. 1951, another Jamaican boy arrives. That's me. I was not born knowing that I would become a psychologist. I certainly didn't imagine sitting behind a microphone at 75 talking about Marcus Garvey. Life doesn't always reveal the whole script at the beginning. You understand it backwards. When you look back, you see all the connections. My journey eventually took me from Jamaica to the City College of New York. I worked full-time and paid my tuition. Next step, Rutgers University, where I earned a master's and a PhD as a psychologist. Then on to teaching, researching, consulting, organizational development, leadership, coaching. Eventually back to Jamaica. But interestingly, before coming back to Jamaica, I had a position at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, Ivy League. And one of the most disturbing things happened to me in my first year on the faculty of Cornell. I received a Distinguished Teacher Award, meaning I was voted the best teacher in Cornell. Now, at that time, Cornell had about 3% Black students. So if all the Black students voted for me, no way could I make it. I had to have been doing something that cut across race. I did it. But that made me very nervous from the standpoint, and I remember asking myself, if I am so good, why am I not back in Jamaica? Helping my people, putting something back in the soil. Because it was poor people's tax money that afforded me a government scholarship from Central Branch Primary School to Kingston College. That unlocked my intellectual capabilities. I was always driven that I have to go back and put something back in the pot. The second component, by the time I was at Cornell, I was married with 2 children, and I wanted my children to have similar childhood that I had on the soil of Jamaica. It was a major step for me. Why do I say that? I took an 80% cut in salary to leave my tenure track position at Cornell to come back to a 1-year temporary appointment at UWI. But I had to do it. So although all of you listening, the question, why do people do what they do? Because many of us are driven. There's a statement from Peter Tosh that has always helped to anchor me. Peter Tosh says many of us were brought from Africa, but then he said there are some of us who were sent by the wise ones to help us to get our people back home. Why do intelligent people repeatedly make choices that hurt them? Why? Why do organizations resist change that they know are needed? Why do societies normalize behavior that ultimately undermine them? Why do some people encounter adversity and grow from it while others surrender and succumb to it? Why do people sometimes defend the very beliefs that imprison them? I call that conceptual incarceration. Those questions became my life's work. And eventually, I came to another conclusion. Psychologists should not live only inside universities. It should not just be in textbooks. It should not require somebody to be in crisis before psychology becomes useful. Psychology belongs at the breakfast table, in marriages, in boardrooms, in schools, in parliaments, in communities, in how we raise boys and girls, in how we age, in how we love, in how we lead, and how we imagine Jamaica. That eventually became part of the thinking behind what we now call the Semaj MindSpa. So I am using the tools that I had to work with. Remember that Garvey, his job initially was a printer. So he knew about the word, he knew about printing, he knew about printing books and newspapers, and he put it to work. I know about the mind. So the Semaj MindSpa, the place where we exercise the mind, where we also ask questions, sometimes uncomfortable questions, because I never believe that my job is to tell people what to think. My job is to encourage people to think. Perhaps Garvey and I share that small piece of philosophical territory. He wanted people to rethink who they were. So do I. Different century, different scale, different tools, but there's something familiar in the question. Who told you who you are? And why did you believe them? Why? Garvey, race, and the courage to define ourselves. That's what he was first noted to do. Garvey's central concern was Black people in a world structured around European power. But there was a broader psychological principle here. Never outsource the definition of yourself. Because whoever gets to define you gains enormous influence over what you believe and what you deserve. This applies to race. It also applies to age. And here's where Garvey at 139 and Semaj at 75 take an interesting turn. Because modern society has another category it likes to define for you: old. At 50, somebody begins asking, when are you retiring? At 60, they start offering you senior everything. At 70, people may begin speaking about you as though your important contributions are behind you. And if you're not careful, you begin accepting that script. You begin shrinking your ambitions to fit society's expectation of your age. I reject that. Age is not a cage. I tell people frequently, I choose not to age. I choose to sage. I choose to get wiser. At 75, I'm certainly older. Let's not play foolish games with language. I'm not 35. My body knows that. Recovery knows that. The mirror knows that. But aging and surrender are not synonymous. It's what I call the anchor leg of life. In a relay race, you don't put your weakest runner on the anchor leg. You put somebody there who has the experience, who knows the assignment, the judgment, the timing, the ability to read the race. And perhaps most importantly, somebody who knows what to do when things don't go according to plan. So why should the anchor leg of human life be treated primarily as decline? Maybe 75 is not simply an age from which to look backwards. Maybe it's a platform from which to look forward. I make it that way. I make it so. Question. What do you think Garvey would say about Jamaica at 64? Now let me get myself in trouble, because birthdays should not be too comfortable. If Garvey could walk through Jamaica today, what would he think? I don't know. Nobody does. We should be careful about putting our opinion into the mouth of dead heroes. But we can ask ourselves, based on the concerns that shaped his life, would he be impressed that Jamaica became an independent nation? Almost certainly. Would he celebrate Jamaica's achievement in music, athletics, academia, business, and culture? I suspect he would. But what questions might he ask? Why, after all these decades, are so many Jamaicans still convinced that their best future exists somewhere else? Why do we export so many of our people we spend enormous resources educating? Why are imported products sometimes automatically treated as superior? Why do we continue struggling to translate extraordinary individual talent into strong collective system? Why is our African inheritance sometimes celebrated ceremonially but not understood deeply? Why do class and color still influence opportunity in Jamaica? Why do we sometimes treat Jamaicans and Jamaica as somewhere to escape rather than somewhere to build? These aren't anti-Jamaican questions. These are profound Jamaican questions. But if Garvey had just come back and asking these questions, I put him aside and point out a couple of things. I said, boss, hear this. Remember you published a book 100 years ago, 2 volumes of your philosophy and opinion? 99% of Jamaicans have never read it. Our Jamaican political system draws nothing from your philosophy and opinions. All your books and your newspapers and your writing and your speeches are not in our school system. Our people are in no way educated to all the things that you did and shared. It's as if you never existed. They will trot you out 2 times. Your birthday and Heroes Day. But my brother Marcus, I live you every day. They are a handful of Jamaicans who live you every day. So, aluta continua. Patriotism cannot mean pretending everything is wonderful. Garvey would not be happy if he came back today. Sometimes loving a country means be willing to ask what it would rather not answer. Garvey certainly understood that. Now, by no means was Garvey perfect. He was not. And we also need to resist turning Garvey into a saint. He was a man, mortal. And human beings are complicated. Garvey could be stubborn. His strategies were controversial. Some of his alliances and political judgment remain debated. His relationships with other Black intellectuals and leaders of his era could become deeply antagonistic. Some of his economic ventures struggled. There were failures. There were contradictions. There were decisions that deserve scrutiny. But that does not diminish Garvey. What it makes studying him even more useful. Because if our heroes must be perfect before we can honor them, we will eventually have no heroes. And if honoring them means refusing to examine their mistakes, their shortcomings, then history becomes mythology. I don't want mythology. I want lessons. Garvey's life teaches us that vision does not guarantee flawless execution. Charisma does not guarantee good judgment. And a righteous cause does not make every strategy righteous. And enormous achievements does not remove human weaknesses. That lesson applies to leaders today. It applies to me, it applies to you. At 75, one of the freedom I increasingly value is the freedom to say, I don't know. I was wrong. I have made mistakes. I have misjudged people. And I believe things I later reconsidered. I have taken roads that I would not have taken had I had more information, had I known what I know now. That's not evidence of a wasted life. That's evidence of having lived. The objective is not to reach old age with no mistake. The objective is to extract wisdom from them. Now, the question, what are you here to do? As we honor Garvey, and I put myself in the breach, I put myself on the bridge as one who stands between what Garvey set out to do and where we are now, as one who tried to do my part, and I'm still at it. There's a question I find myself asking more often these days. What are you here to do? What are you here to do? Every single one of us is here for a purpose. Have you ever examined what we call the ancestral mathematics? You realize what it took over how many generations to produce you, me, our two parents and their two parents and their two parents and their two parents and their two parents and so on. The amount of things that we survived to produce you listening to me right now. You are not an accident, neither am I. The question is, why are you here? Why am I here? I have answered that question for myself. And I like to remind people, that I see as my job, I'm here to teach those who did not learn, to remind those who are forgotten, to heal the mentally sick, to raise the spiritually dead, and to set the cultural captives free. That's my job. One of the most critical books in my life, my arsenal, a book called The Healers. It's always in my library. The Healers was given to me by Ayikwe Armah, Ghanaian writer, when I was teaching at Cornell University. And there's a quote in it that it shifted my life, where it points out that the question, Damford seemed undecided between puzzlement and amusement at the beginning. But after Densu had asked the first question on his mind, he looked neither baffled nor amused. To Densu's surprise, Damford talked to him not like an adult to a child, but just like one person to another. Question, what really is a healer's work? Densu asked. You may say it is seeing and hearing and knowing. I don't understand, Densu told them. Take any place, the forest. Men walk through the forest, they see leaves, trees, insects, but they see little. They hear many forest sounds, but they hear little. A healer sees more, Densu asked. A healer sees differently. He hears differently. And he goes on to explain the work of a healer, the work. And one of the things, question asked, can everyone become a healer? few ever want to be healers. But could everyone be a healer? No. Why not? The healer must first have a healer's nature. I can tell you what it is. In the beginning, he who would be a healer must set great value on seeing truly, hearing truly, understanding truly, and acting truly. You see why healers can't be popular? It can't be a popular vocation. The healer would rather see and hear and understand than have power over men. Most people would rather have power over men than see and hear. And he goes on to ask more, but the critical thing for me that the struggle that the ultimate work of a healer. It is first unity that gives a healer's work its strength. Think of it. People can be diseased in the same way as the individual body. Those who naturally did to be together but are not. Are there not people sicker than the individual body disintegrated from its soul? The healing work that cures a whole people is the highest work. Far higher than curing a single individual. That line shifted my consciousness. It wasn't for me to sit in an office to try to help individuals one at a time as a psychologist. But can I help to cure a nation? When I sit behind a microphone, when I go on the internet, what I can do. Why are you here? What job do you have to do? Garvey knew his assignment. Not what title is on your business card. Not what degrees are hanging on the wall. What are you here to do? Garvey appears to have found his answer early. He wanted to awaken the people. He wanted Black people to see themselves differently. He wanted economic power, political power, psychological independence. Whatever we think about a particular method, there was clarity of purpose. Most of us will never lead a global movement, but we don't need to. Perhaps purpose is not measured by your audience size. A teacher can have purpose. A farmer can have purpose. A grandmother raising a grandchild can have purpose. A carpenter can have purpose. A nurse can have purpose. A businessman can have purpose. People ask, who is better because you are here? That's what purpose asks. Who is better because you are here? What changed because you showed up? What did you build? What did you teach? You know, let's say about teach, let me get some trouble here. I say every artist, every singer, every DJ is a teacher. The question is, what are they teaching? What's in their lesson plan? What are the objects? What are they trying to teach people? Every artist. Why is it that the artists who call themselves roots and culture artists? So what I teach about roots and culture. So what about the artists who, what they're proposing is violence and irresponsible sex? Why don't they admit and say, well, I am teaching people. The question is, what did you teach? Can you imagine if there's such a thing as a day of judgment and that question is asked? What did you teach? Whom did you encourage? What problem did you help to solve? What did you leave better than you found it? See, I have described myself as a catalyst. It's a very important word, that catalyst. I first met it in chemistry. it has become a very important word to me. A catalyst helps some things to happen, but it does not have to become the center of everything. A catalyst facilitates the rate of change of a reaction, but it itself remains unchanged, and it is able to go on to change other reactions and other reactions. If somebody encounters an idea through the mind spa and encourage a conversation in their marriage, so be it. Wonderful. If a man hears something that helps him rethink his life, if somebody approaching retirement realizing that their productive years are not over, if a young person begins questioning a limiting belief, something has happened. A little psychological reaction, a catalyst. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's enough. So we see the reality. We see the reality. And it's important for us to understand and admit and exercise these things. Because when you segue back and forth, into, Garvey's life and my life and here and now, there's some interesting things that, that I, like to point out. Difference between 2026 and 1920. Garvey's teachings were and still remain relevant. Number one, self-reliance. Garvey built ships, newspapers, factories, businesses, because he refused to wait for somebody else's institution to include him. Jamaica today wrestles with a dependency instinct, economically and psychologically, that Garvey diagnosed a century ago. Self-reliance was never about doing everything alone. It was about refusing to be structurally powerless. Garvey talked about dignity as a discipline, not a mood. Garvey insisted on pride, not as a feeling you wait to have, but as a posture you choose to hold, especially when the world gives you every reason not to. That is a psychological practice, not a slogan. And thirdly, and this one, again, is the one where I tie Garvey, the psychologist. Garvey understood that a people's vulnerability is not their poverty, but their internalization of doubt. Colonization does not just do damaging, it provides lasting damage to the mind long after the flag comes down. That's the work I've spent 4 decades trying in both the classrooms and the boardrooms and now on radio to do. So Garvey's philosophy is not a museum piece. It's a live wire. And I think the truest way to honor a man who spoke about unfinished national works is not to quote him, but to ask honestly, what is still undone? What is it that you are here to do? What can you do to continue that work that Garvey started? Now, interestingly, when you see how Garvey operated and how long he lived, he didn't know a long time. His health suffered because of, the condition under which he was jailed. But nonetheless, he did, with every fiber in his body, he was committed to a task. And I love that expression, that he knew the assignment and he held on to it. And he honored the assignment right through. It was not something that he neglected. He made sure that the assignment was complete. Now, the great question at 75 for me is how much time is left? No. There's something about 75 that you can't avoid. It's time. At 25, time feels almost infinite. At 75, you know better. At 75, there are more years behind me than ahead of me. Now, that's not pessimism. That's just straight arithmetic. But here's the strange thing. Knowing that your time is limited can make life even more valuable. You become more selective. I have less interest in pointless arguments. I have less interest in impressing people. I have less interest in relationships maintained purely from obligation. I have less interest in performing versions of myself that make other people comfortable. Time is too expensive. At 75, the question changes from how much can I accumulate? No, no, no. The main question for me is how well can I use the time I have remaining? That may be one of the greatest gifts you have in the anchor leg. The greatest gift. Huh? Now, how do you use that time? Clarity. You begin separating what is urgent from what is important. You understand that relationships need tending, just like a plant. Your health needs tending. Your purpose needs tending. Your curiosity needs tending. Joy needs tending. And you realize that postponement is a dangerous habit. You know, one thing I did this week was an executive profile. Complete meds, evaluated, labs, updated. So over the next week, 2, I'll be meeting with my physician because you have to make sure you upgrade and you tend to the system. You realize that postponement is a dangerous habit once you reach that 75. Someday is no longer an acceptable business plan. You thought of somebody, I call them right away. Take the trip. Write the book. Plant the tree. Start the project. Repair the relationship if it can and should be repaired. Say no where no is required. Say yes where fear has been holding you back. Because eventually every human runs out of tomorrows. Garvey did. I will. You will. The issue is not whether the clock stopped. The issue is, what were you doing while the clock was running? Legacy is not what you own. Garvey died in 1940. Yet here we are in 2026 still talking about him. Think about that. The man is gone, but the conversation continues. That is legacy. Legacy is not simply what you leave to people. It is what you leave in people. The ideas, the courage, the questions, the institutions, the memories, the possibilities, sometimes even the warnings. At 75, legacy becomes less theoretical. I ask myself, when Leahcim Semaj is no longer here, what remains? Not the house, not the car, not the certificates, not the possessions accumulated over decades. It is what remains in people. What remains in my children? What remains in people I have taught? What remains in organizations I have worked with? What remains in somebody who watched a 2-minute MindSpa video at 2 o'clock one morning when life wasn't going particularly well. What remains in Jamaica? As I mentioned, video. You know that 2 of my videos recently have been really impacting people. One of them, in which I raise questions, I remind with all the big holiday weekend, how few, if any, activities are presented for people 50 and over. Everything is focusing on those between 25 and 35. I got over 106,000 responses. People understand the assignment. But even greater, I had an article and a series of videos where I asked the question, has repast replaced reunions? And I am pleased to note the number of people have told me how many times they received that video clip on their WhatsApp feeds, you know, in their Facebook account, and directly where friends and people are talking about that. I consciously practice what I preach. Yes, what remains in Jamaica? I don't fully know. Perhaps we never know our own ripple. You know, you drop something and it ripples out. Garvey could not possibly have known every person his ideas would eventually touch. None of us can. We throw stones into the water, the ripples travel beyond our eyesight, which means the important question may not be, will I be remembered? It may be, am I creating something worth remembering? These are the questions. These are the questions. Now, I want to use one thing to help to clarify so you understand that, as many of you listening to me, I am so proud that when I look at the numbers of people who are actively, you know, keeping in touch with the MindSpa, when I look online, up to 800,000 people in a 28-day period, you know, actually see the MindSpa activities as such. But when I start to break down the engagements and the followers and so on, the largest cohort that engage in MindSpa content are people 64 and over. I am proud of that. The largest cohort. So when you add that now to the cohort before that, those in their 40s, that's more than half. Because I'm saying that my primary focus are people in the second half of life. And understand this, folks. The last 30 years of your life are the most important. Those are the most important. Because, look, the great thing we have working without, there's a concept in psychology called crystallized intelligence. It's the accumulated knowledge and judgment and pattern recognition that only comes from having lived long enough to see things repeat. Unlike fluid intelligence, which young people have more of, which declines with age, crystallized intelligence often deepens. It's quite literally the neuroscience behind the phrase, wisdom of age. Here at 75, here's what I know that I did not know at 35. I know that most crises feel permanent, and almost none of them are. I know that dignity is a decision you make daily, not a status you achieve once. I know that the loudest voice in a room is rarely the wisest one. I know that because I've watched enough cycles of Jamaicans and diaspora life, that the same unfinished business Garvey named a century ago keeps resurfacing in new clothing. Economic dependency, migration as escape rather than partnership, a fragile sense of self-worth. Crystallized intelligence is not nostalgia. It is data. is what allows an older mind to see a pattern younger minds still living through it for the first time. That's the gift of 75. It's the same gift, I believe, that let a man born in 1887 write words in his 30s that we now are still quoting. Crystallized intelligence. That's what allows us to do this. So that's the reality. That's what happened. So today, on this date that gave us Marcus Garvey, and 75 years later, the world, one more Jamaican psychologist to finish a small piece of his unfinished business. I want to leave you with this. You do not need to share birthdays with a great man to inherit his charge. You only need to decide that the work is still yours to do. Up, you mighty race. Anchor leg. Crystallized wisdom. Whatever language you use for it, the charge is the same. The assignment is still the same. Accomplish what you will. Because the alternative is to waste a gift someone else did not get the years to use. You got your gift. You got it. Are you using it? Are you making the most of it? If not, who are you going to explain that to? So here we are, two men born the same day, August 17. Marcus Messiah today, 139, Leahcim Semaj, 75. I am grateful to share the date, but I'm even more grateful for the question the coincidence gives me every birthday. What are you doing with your turn? Garvey had his turn. He used it boldly, imperfectly, controversially, extraordinarily. And then this time, his time ended. I am having my turn. At 75, I'm increasingly aware that this is exactly what life is. A turn. You arrive, you inherit a world you did not create, you spend some years trying to understand it. Then if you're fortunate, you spend some years trying to improve it. Eventually, you hand over. The question is whether the world or even one small corner of it is different because you pass through. So on my 70th cycle around the sun, I don't particularly want to celebrate becoming old. I want to celebrate becoming. Still thinking, still questioning, still creating, still loving, still learning, still changing my mind when the evidence requires it, still trying to be useful, and still trying to illuminate some corners of the human experience. I don't know how many cycles remain. None of us do. But I know how I want to use them. I want to enter the anchor leg lighter, less baggage, less foolishness, less needs for approval, more love, more curiosity, more purpose, more freedom, and more willingness to say what I believe needs to be said. Marcus Garvey gave Jamaica and the world a powerful psychological message. Do not allow somebody else to determine the limits of who you can become. That message still matters for a people, for a country, and for an individual at 75. Because perhaps the greatest act of freedom is continuing to become yourself, even when the world thinks you're finished. So today, on the Marcus Garvey, on the 139th anniversary of his birth, I give thanks for my own 75 cycles around the sun. For those who came before me, for those who walked with me, for those who challenged me, for those who loved me, for those who taught me, for those who disappointed me, for all somewhere in the story, and those who continue the journey after me. Don't merely admire Garvey. Ask what his life requires of you. Don't merely celebrate on the birthday. Make your years count. 2 men, 2 journey, 1 Jamaican soil. Till we meet again. Aluta continua.